Good evening. I'm Allison Cover, and I'm a nurse and an epidemiologist. I want to welcome each one of you tonight. Some of you have come to our health and cooking classes, and I want to say a really big welcome back to you. And some of you are new to this, and I want to give you a big welcome for that as well. This is actually our first time ever doing a live virtual presentation like this, and we're really excited to have you joining us tonight. This presentation will stay live on YouTube after tonight, so feel free to look at it again or to share it on social media or to send the link to friends who might be interested. We are super excited to have you joining us tonight, and if you ever need to find out more about us, you can look us up on our website at healthforlifepostfalls.com. Usually when we do cooking, like classes like this or presentations, we have a cooking demonstration or food samples, which obviously we can't do. So if you registered for the class, you should have gotten the recipe packet as well as a contact number so that you could text questions to us during or after the presentation. We are also going to do the cooking demonstration on video, and so those will be uploaded over the next couple of weeks, and we'll send you emails when we actually have those available for you to see, and they will be demonstrating the foods that are in the packet. So there will be a demonstration for how to make the walnut cookies, there'll be a demonstration for how to do swamp smoothie, a demonstration for making the kale salad and the sauteed kale. Again, that'll be on our website, which is healthforlifepostfalls.com. So at the end of the presentation, there will be time for questions. Feel free to text those to me at any time. And I just want to say that even though Annalee is a nurse practitioner, she will not be providing any personal medical advice during the presentation or during the question and answer time. So I am totally thrilled to have my good friend Annalee Wilson giving this presentation tonight. She is a practicing family nurse practitioner here in the Spokane area. She is very knowledgeable about whole food, plant-based nutrition, and she is board certified by the American Board of Lifestyle Medicine, which is a certification body for medical professionals. So I'm going to let Annalee take it now, and thanks, Annalee.
Thank you, Allison. And thank you, everybody who is joining us tonight. As Allison said, I'm a nurse practitioner. My specialty is family practice, and what I'm really passionate about is integrative and lifestyle medicine. So really looking at the core of how people are living their lives and what they can be doing to live healthier and prevent and reverse chronic disease in the most holistic way that they can. Of course, one of the big issues that we're seeing, especially these days, is struggle with mental illness and stress, anxiety, depression, particularly in relation to the pandemic that we're all living through right now. So Allison asked me to come and talk about how I approach that and ways that we can address it through lifestyle means, including nutrition, exercise, and other ways. So that is what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. So as we all know, we are currently living through unprecedented times, unless you lived in 1918, which I think it's safe to say no one listening to this probably did. We are living through a pandemic that none of us really anticipated. So we're dealing with a whole bunch of new stressors, including things like being worried about our loved ones getting sick, ourselves getting sick, financial burdens, social isolation, having our normal routines be completely disrupted, strain on our relationships. And most of us haven't dealt with these factors before, especially not all kind of combined at one time. This sort of stress, because of the lack of control that we feel and the fact that we don't have any sort of clear end date to it, is really trying for people, and we are seeing an increased rate of things like anxiety and depression and substance use because of that. In fact, there was a Kaiser Family Foundation tracking poll conducted in mid-July that said that 53% of adults in the US reported that their mental health had been negatively impacted due to the worry and stress over the coronavirus. So it's definitely something that we're seeing a lot of. I'm seeing it every day in my practice and my patients. We're all struggling to get by. So I'm going to kind of go through each sort of modality that I think of addressing when I see people who are struggling with this, and things that I try to incorporate into my own lifestyle. So first we'll talk about nutrition. Unsurprisingly, maybe to some, surprisingly to others, poor diet does increase risk of mental illness. And so when they've studied this, they've looked at this as far as overall dietary patterns, and they've also kind of gotten more on a microscopic level looking at individual nutrients. When we look at patterns, we do see that a Western dietary pattern is associated with an increased risk of anxiety and depression. What is a Western dietary pattern? Well, that is one that has an inordinate amount of things like red and processed meats, saturated fat, trans fat, refined sweets, sweetened beverages, processed foods, that kind of thing. Why would this increase the risk of mental illness? One reason would be that it's nutrient poor. So we're eating a lot of foods that are very rich in calories, but not very rich in nutrients. And I will talk a little bit more about nutrients further on in the presentation. And another is that this sort of pattern is pro-inflammatory. So there is actually a theory of anxiety and depression that there's some underlying inflammation that's contributing to it. And this is getting more and more evidence behind it. The Western dietary pattern is pro-inflammatory because of those things that I listed: the saturated fat, trans fat, the refined sugars. These create a pro-inflammatory state in the body and also in the brain, and that can result in increased rates of anxiety and depression. And then looking as far as dietary patterns that reduce rates of mental illness, whole foods and Mediterranean dietary patterns have been shown to be protective. Specific foods that have been shown to be beneficial include vegetables, fruits, fish, nuts, and whole grains. A strict whole foods plant-based dietary pattern has not been well studied in relation to stress and mental health, just because it's like sort of a newer, I guess you would say, dietary pattern, and there just hasn't been the research done on it for us to look at. However, when you're looking at these overall patterns in which foods promote mental wellness, a pattern emerges that does show that a whole foods plant-based dietary pattern would lend itself to improved mental health. So when you're looking more specifically at nutrients, there's a few that stand out for being protective against mental illness and being protective against things like anxiety and depression. One of them is antioxidants. So there's several of these things like polyphenols, carotenoids, lycopene, vitamin C, and so forth. Antioxidants are anti-inflammatory. So going back to what I was talking about before, this theory of inflammation being at one of the root causes of anxiety and depression, this is protective against that. Antioxidants are like putting water on a fire. So those are mostly found in whole plant foods. Bright color is a good indicator that a food is rich in antioxidants. A few of the superstars many people probably know about include things like berries, dark leafy greens, sweet potatoes, broccoli sprouts specifically, also broccoli, and green tea. Essentially, if you're trying to eat the rainbow every day, you're going to be getting a good variety of antioxidants in your diet. Another sort of family of nutrients that's of concern is the B vitamins. Folate, also called B9, and vitamin B12 are particularly important. They're actually a part of neurotransmitter production. And if you're deficient in those two nutrients, your neurotransmitter production will suffer for it. So those B vitamins are rich in specific foods. So folate you're going to find in beans, grains, whole grains, greens, and nuts and seeds. B12 is more rich in animal products, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but you can also find it in fortified foods and supplements. Another nutrient that you want to pay attention to when you're eating for mental wellness is omega-3 fatty acids. So again, these are anti-inflammatory. We're noticing that be a theme, that inflammation is important and cutting inflammation is important. They're also just really crucial for neurological function in general. So you can find omega-3 fatty acids in dark leafy greens, walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, and fish. An important consideration with that is what they call your omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. Ideally, you're always going to have more omega-6 than omega-3, but you want to decrease that ratio as much as you can. Omega-6 is very plentiful in the food supply, And if you eat too much of it, it kind of pushes out the omega-3 production. So omega-6 is very abundant in things like processed foods and animal products. And if you're minimizing those and increasing those foods I just listed, the dark leafy greens, walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, fish, you're going to be improving the omega-3 to 6 ratio. And that is going to have more of an anti-inflammatory effect. Another nutrient to consider is magnesium. Again, that is rich in some of the same foods that we see with folate, so beans, greens, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. It tends to have an overall calming effect on your central nervous system, and many Americans do not get enough of it because of the foods that it tends to be rich in we're not eating enough of, similar to folate. All this said, I always tell my patients to not get super focused on individual nutrients. You can't supplement your way out of a poor diet, which tends to be something we're all inclined to do. We really are intended to get these nutrients through food, and that's where research has really shown it to be beneficial. It's not so much taking vitamins, it's eating plenty of whole plant foods in your diet. So I want to touch a little bit more specifically on B12, especially because many of you may be plant-based eaters. So it is worth mentioning. Vitamin B12 is important for neurological, cognitive, and mental health. It is produced by bacteria that live in soil. Our ancestors likely got it from the dirt that they were eating and the water they drank and the food that they ate. It is present in animal products because those animals are either supplemented or they're eating that dirt. But you do have to consider the trade-offs because animal products, like we touched on with the Western dietary pattern, being in particular, does have negative health effects that you would want to try to avoid if possible. B12 is also added to fortified foods like meat substitutes, plant milks, and nutritional yeast, and it's readily available in supplement form for really cheap, actually. If you are eating a strict whole foods plant-based / vegan diet, you must incorporate a reliable source of vitamin B12 or you will get deficient. Deficiency can cause permanent neurological damage, so it's not something that you want to mess around with. The recommendations I take from Dr. Greger, who many of you have probably heard of. He has a great website called nutritionfacts.org. And based on the latest available research, he recommends getting at least 2,000 micrograms of cyanocobalamin, which is just the fancy name for vitamin B12, per week, ideally as a chewable, sublingual, or liquid supplement taken on an empty stomach. You can also split it up and do like 1,000 micrograms, 2 or 3 times a week. Say you do it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or Tuesdays and Thursdays, something like that. If you are over the age of 65, you tend to not absorb vitamin B12 as efficiently. We require sufficient stomach acid to absorb it, and that tends to decrease as we get older. So the daily recommendation is increased for those over age 65. You want to be getting at least 1,000 micrograms every day. And then one of my favorite topics, and one that there's a lot of emerging research coming out about, is the role of the microbiome. So fiber, which is really only in plant foods, in particular whole plant foods, nourishes a healthy microbiome. The microbiome is this population of microbes that hangs out particularly in our large intestine. We used to just think they hung out there and didn't do much, but now we realize it's kind of its own organ. When you nourish these bacteria with fiber, they in turn will synthesize anti-inflammatory compounds called short-chain fatty acids and produce neurotransmitters. And they also are in communication with our nervous system. So basically they're kind of telling our nervous system how things are going. So if you're not eating as healthy of a diet, then that's going to be fed back to essentially your brain and can have a negative effect on your mood. The microbiome is also important for maintaining a healthy intestinal lining, which in turn decreases systemic inflammation levels. So again, we're coming back to that theme of inflammation. So the take-home message is that fiber is critical to overall health, including mental and emotional health. You cannot have a healthy microbiome if you are not eating sufficient fiber. And I'm not talking about Metamucil or fiber supplements. I'm talking about whole plant foods. That's really where the research shows the benefits to be. Fiber is especially abundant in whole grains and legumes. And when I'm talking whole grains, I'm talking like real whole grains like oatmeal and brown rice and quinoa and farro and things where you can actually see the grain. A good intake that everyone should have as a goal is around 40 to 50 grams of fiber per day. Just as to put that in perspective, I think the average American intake is around 12 grams per day. And when they look at what our ancestors were probably eating, oftentimes it looks like it was more than 100 grams a day. So we're doing really poorly in this as a population. and we're suffering as a result. So based on the previous slides, we can kind of draw some conclusions about what we see the common themes being as far as what is healthy and not so healthy of a diet for maintaining a good mood and decreasing your risk of anxiety and depression. So essentially, we want a diet that is rich in antioxidants, vitamins, and fiber, but also low in saturated fat, trans fat, processed foods, and refined sugars. So when you want to check all those boxes, the best foods to be eating to do that are whole plant foods. And then there's a special benefit to eating things like dark leafy greens, whole grains, beans, and nuts and seeds because of those particular nutrients like the B vitamins and the magnesium and the antioxidants and so forth. So now shifting gears, we're going to move on to exercise. Most people know that regular exercise is really important for physical health. It's also very important for our mental and emotional health. Our bodies were meant to move. Both aerobic and resistance-based exercises have been shown to be helpful for anxiety and depression. Exercise actually makes you more resilient to psychological stress. So in other words, physically stressing your body builds your body's resilience to physical stress, but it also improves your resilience to psychological stress. There's likely multiple mechanisms of action to account for this, including endorphin release. Endorphins are kind of those feel-good chemicals that we've all heard of. Neurotransmitter production, increased neurological growth factors, decreased inflammation, and others that we probably don't even know about. The recommendations from the World Health Organization for amount of exercise are 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity or 75 minutes per week of vigorous intensity aerobic exercise. So kind of a good rule of thumb I have my patients use for determining the intensity of exercise is how well they can talk when they're exercising. If you're still having like a conversation with someone when you're exercising, that is a pretty low intense exercise. You want to be exercising hard enough that you can't speak in complete sentences because you're breathing too hard. You also want to try to incorporate resistance exercise a couple times a week, preferably on non-consecutive days, and try to exercise all of the large muscle groups. With exercise, it's really important that you find something you genuinely enjoy because it's not going to be sustainable if you're having to, for example, drag yourself to the gym. Maybe you're someone who enjoys team sports or going out for walks or runs or something like that instead. The other thing I always tell my patients is that any exercise is better than none. We are all crunched for time. So even if you don't have an hour to spend at the gym, we all have at least 5 minutes that we can spend every day moving our bodies. And there is improvement and health benefits seen even with that little amount of exercise. Probably my next favorite topic after nutrition would be sleep, probably because I love sleep so much. People think of sleep as kind of just like a time when we shut down, our brains shut off and we rest, but it's actually a very complex and dynamic process, and it's required for survival. We don't even fully understand all of the, what exactly happens during sleep. We do know that it's necessary for emotional regulation, normal cognitive function, and stress resilience. And we know that poor sleep is both a cause and a consequence of mental illness. So, for example, if you're suffering from insomnia or some disturbed sleep in some way, you are at increased risk for anxiety and depression. And on the same lines, anxiety and depression often lead to altered sleep patterns. So it kind of can become a vicious cycle that way. The recommendations are for adults to get 7 to 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep every night, and that preferably is high quality sleep, so not like sleep where you're waking up every half an hour or being woken up by something regularly. Sleep hygiene refers to behaviors that people can take to improve the overall quality of their sleep. So this includes things like keeping a consistent bed and wake up time, avoiding caffeine, particularly in the afternoon, avoiding alcohol. One alcoholic beverage before bed will affect 2 hours of sleep. It causes rebound waking and makes you not get as deep of sleep as you would without drinking alcohol. Also things like avoiding screens before you go to bed. Exercise during the day helps with sleep. These are all little things that people can do that help them have better quality sleep. And then something that doesn't get as much focus is the importance of light in our circadian rhythm. So the circadian rhythm is responsible for regulating multiple bodily processes, and nighttime light exposure is disruptive to this rhythm. We're meant to be in dark in the evening. When we're exposed to nighttime light, it's been shown to be associated with increased rates of mood disorders and poor sleep. Blue light from screens in particular has been shown to be harmful, but it's also preventable. There are multiple filtering apps available There's also filtering glasses. And then, of course, there's just that you can put your own restrictions on when you get off of screens. And preferably, you're not on them for a couple hours before you go to bed. It's also important to seek out bright light in the first part of the day, in addition to keeping light low in the evening. And you want your bedroom to be completely dark for sleep. You shouldn't have a TV on. I hear this a lot, that patients use a TV to go to sleep. They're really sabotaging their own sleep and their mental and physical health when they do that. There's also blackout blinds that you can buy so that you're not letting any of the ambient light from outside get into your room. Interestingly, the nighttime light exposure has also been shown to increase risk of obesity and weight gain. And then something that we're all feeling right now is the effects of isolation on our mental health. So humans are social beings. We all know this. Loneliness and isolation are well-established risk factors for mental health issues, including anxiety and depression and decreased stress resilience. Of course, we're all utilizing self-isolation right now to prevent the spread of coronavirus, and that is necessary, but we do have to consider the mental health implications. So you want to try to foster community in alternative ways wherever you can. That may be checking in with others, picking up the phone, calling a friend or a family member, also reaching out yourself and letting people know that you're struggling or that you're feeling lonely. There are these days a lot of virtual counseling options available, such as BetterHelp and some other ones, and I'm not giving a plug to that, but that's just one example. So if you feel like you need more professional help, don't let the pandemic be a barrier to that, because there are ways around it. And then, of course, we all know that there's things like FaceTime and Zoom and other ways that we can connect, or maybe it's sending emails or a handwritten letter or something along those lines. Some other things to consider. So because many of us are not physically going into work or school these days, our routines and the structure of our daily life has been a little bit disrupted. And so I'm encouraging my patients to sort of reinstitute that routine. So consistent wake up and bedtimes is important, setting aside a specific time to get outside and exercise, and also having a transition between your work and home life. So it's hard when you're at home, you don't have that, when you're working at home, you don't have that firm boundary between when work ends and your personal life begins. And so doing something like going for a short drive or a walk, something along those lines, just to sort of set up that boundary so that you can shift your mindset. Something else that you come across in the research and literature around mental wellness is having purpose and meaning in your life. So those who report having more meaning in their lives have better stress resilience, which I guess shouldn't be all that surprising. So it's important for people to know, what's your why? Like, what are you passionate about? What drives you? And then also there is research coming out more and more about how nature is associated with lower levels of stress, or spending time in nature. And they're even seeing this with like getting outside and going to a park for even just as little as 10 minutes. That will be beneficial for people's mental wellness, or also being exposed even through windows. Like if you are indoors, having a window near nature where you can look out and see trees, for example, is known to be beneficial as well. So as I was writing this presentation, and kind of something I've thought about before, is that many of the risk factors we see for mental illness, anxiety, stress, depression, these sorts of things, seem to be associated with moving away from what would be considered normal or natural for human beings. So for example, in our modern times, we've moved away from what would be considered our ancestral diet, which is largely plant-based and pretty much all whole foods, because they didn't have processed foods. And now we're all eating more of what we would call the standard American diet. In addition, we're not moving our bodies like we used to. We're not getting the good quality sleep like we used to. We are ignoring the normal rhythms of our days and seasons, being exposed to light in unnatural times. We're also more isolated and lonely than we've ever been before, rather than living as part of a community, and we spend less time outdoors than ever before. So I think really the answer is quite simple if you're looking at it in those terms. The more we get back to what we all know is good for us, sort of things like your mom would tell you, it tends to be the better off our mental health is. So with that, I am open to any questions, which I think Allison is going to read from her phone if she got any.
Thank you, Annalee. That was really good. So we do have one question that's come in, and the question is, I heard that if I get even 10 minutes here and there of exercise, like to equal 30 minutes, that's still pretty good, that I don't need to necessarily get my 30 minutes a day all at one time.
Yep, absolutely. So they put it in weekly increments, the whole World Health Organization. I think just so people can conceptualize it, and then you can break that up however you want. So the 150 minutes could be 30 minutes 5 days a week, or maybe you're doing 15-minute slots 10 times per week. I mean, it's however you can incorporate that into your day. It doesn't necessarily have to be all at one time or all in 3 or 4 times. So, and even if you can't get that 150 minutes per week, they literally have studied people doing just 5 minutes of exercise to people not doing any exercise in a day, and you still see benefits with just 5 minutes per day. So that's why I say any is better than none, and it tends to be the more you get, the better.
And we had another question, and this one seems to come up a lot. And someone was wondering if it's okay to drink or eat soy, and what kind they should have.
So yeah, soy is actually quite healthy for you. So a lot of the confusion that surrounds soy is actually misinformation, particularly around the fact that soy contains phytoestrogens, which are basically like a weak plant version of estrogen. So people hear that and they mistakenly think that it could be increasing risk of things like breast cancer, or it may feminize men, things like this, which really the research actually shows the opposite. So as far as the hormonal aspects are concerned, phytoestrogens, because they're a weak estrogen and they'll bind our estrogen receptors, will actually block our estrogen from entering that same receptor, which means the overall effect is going to be less, because what is in that receptor is a weaker estrogen. So it makes sense then that when they study this, we actually see lower rates of breast cancer and prostate cancer in people who regularly consume soy foods. Soy also has antioxidants and things in it that are good for you. Specifically has something called lignans that are good for you. So I think it's a great food. I would say that I would stay away from the more processed soy foods and stick with the more whole soy foods. So things like edamame, soy milk, tofu. Those are where you're going to see the most health benefits.
Okay, so here's another question. If I go whole food plant-based to try and get all my vegetables and everything, do I need to worry about how much protein I get?
So this is probably the most common question that anybody who's ever gone plant-based will ever get in their lives. So a couple things on this. One, protein is in all foods, all whole foods. And when we say protein, what we're really talking about is amino acids. So amino acids are basically the building blocks of protein. And all plant foods do contain amino acids. Our body is very smart at disassembling and reassembling amino acids as needed, recycling them as needed, and building them into whatever they need to be as needed. As long as you are getting sufficient calories and you're getting them from a variety of whole plant foods, it's nearly impossible to not get enough amino acids for your protein needs. I think the statistics on that for the US population show that the vast majority of Americans, including people who are vegetarian and vegan, actually exceed their protein needs every day. So really it's not a concern in this population. You really only see protein deficiency in people who are also calorie deficient. So people who are struggling with like end-stage cancer, for example, or people with eating disorders. You're better off focusing your energy on getting fiber, which is something the vast majority of Americans don't get enough of. That will also automatically mean that you're eating plenty of whole plant foods, and with that is going to come all of the amino acids and protein that you need.
Okay, we have another question. How does essential oils work with anxiety and depression? Is it better to use them or not?
So I think there is some data around lavender, probably has the most research behind it, that one, just smelling it can be helpful. And then there's actually also lavender essential oil capsules that you can actually take orally, that there's some limited research showing a beneficial effect. I will add the caveat to this that there has also been some research showing that lavender essential oil can have hormonal effects particularly in prepubescent children and boys. So it's not something you would want to have those children like rubbing on their bodies in large quantities on a regular basis. That said, I think, or taking the capsules, I guess. I think doing it as an essential oil where you're smelling it, again, has some research and is a pretty safe thing to do. And if it's something you enjoy and you feel like it helps with your stress, then absolutely keep doing it.
Okay. I've heard that carbohydrates will make me gain weight, but you said to eat them.
I love carbohydrates. Yeah, this is why looking at food in terms of macronutrients is not helpful. So the macronutrients are carbs, protein, and fat. And when you know whether a food is a carb, a protein, or a fat, you still know nothing about how healthy it is for you. So a good example of this is that marshmallows are mostly carbohydrate. Sweet potatoes are also mostly carbohydrate. They could not be more different in the effect that they have on your body. So I usually have the conversation with my patients to not get caught up in the macronutrient dogma, so to speak. Again, if you're eating mostly whole foods and you're getting sufficient calories and you're preferably eating most of those foods from plants, the macronutrient ratio really is not important. They've done studies showing weight loss with any number of macronutrient combinations, meaning, low protein, low fat and high carb, and also very high protein and high fat and low carb. You can see weight loss with any of them, because typically when people are following any of those dietary patterns, they're also restricting their calories, which is what really leads to weight loss. So primary concern should be with eating food that's nutritious, that tastes good, that you're going to want to continue to eat, which again tends to be whole plant foods. And then the macronutrient issue kind of becomes a non-issue.
So far, that's all I have for questions, unless, did anyone other? Nope. I think that's it.
Okay.
Thank you, Annalee.
Yeah, thank you.